This is Art, and it's time. Let's be reasonable. This is our show we do. It's about politics and news. We like to touch the top five news stories of the week on Friday night. So that's what we'll be doing tonight. Our other show during the week is really about the 2024 candidates. You kind of like getting to meet the candidates and also just other news that may pop up that may be of interest to us. So that being said, let's just dive right into it. Not want to hold you long. Let's get to the top five, and let's start with number five in that list. And of course, that will be our friend, now independent candidate, RFK, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy, is now running as an independent. He at one time was running as the Democratic hopeful, or someone to kind of shadow the Biden administration and the Democrat incumbent. But now he switched and decided that he's going to run as an independent. I'm going to tell you, he is a liberal Democrat. However, he has what I would refer to as populist tendencies. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I am saying that as he um, says more, he is saying things that I think liberals like to hear, but he's also speaking to his conservative followers as well. So, and if you really look, there's three main types of candidates that the two-party system has created. There are people who are extremely conservative, and then you have variations of that. You have liberal politicians, and you have variations of that. And then you have a lane of moderates. Moderates are generally, let's call them conservative Democrats, or they could be liberal Republicans, people who have a tendency to want to flip flop one way or another because of their district for the most part. So most of the people who you find in the moderate camp are people who are in congressional districts where it's purple. What do I mean by purple? It means it's not really Democrat blue, and it's not really Republican red. It's kind of a mix. It's kind of purple. So moderates generally come from these purple districts, and he's running as that libertarian candidate, so not libertarian, but moderate, you might say, independent candidate. But within the independent sphere, there are, social conservatives. You have libertarians. You have probably two or three other factions, even within the independent lane. And remember, when it comes to American or U.S. politics, it's a third, a third, a third. You have a third that's Republican. You have a third that's Democrat. And you have a third of the population that's generally independent or libertarian. And again, it's that particular slice, the independent libertarian, that generally assists one of the other two parties. They will either assist the Democrats, like they did with Obama, they will, or Biden this time around, or they will assist the Republicans like they did with Trump. So that's the way the spectrum looks. Let's take a peek at what RFK had to say not too long ago, actually, when he announced. So let's take a peek at what he had to say, and then we'll talk a little bit about it on the other side. So here we go. Matter of fact, hang on just for a second. Let's get this here. Okay.
Independent candidate for President of the United States. But that's not all. I'm here to join you in making a new Declaration of Independence for our entire nation. We declare independence from the corporations that have hijacked our government. And we declare independence from Wall Street, from big tech, from big pharma, from big ag, from the military contractors and their lobbyists. And we declare independence from the mercenary media that is here to to fortify all of the corporate orthodoxies from their advertisers and to urge us to hate our neighbors and to fear our friends. And we declare independence from the cynical elites who betray our hope and who amplify our divisions. And finally, we declare independence from the two political parties.
And there you have it. So it's just a fragment of what he said. That piece ran for about 50 minutes. If you want to listen to it, I mean, it's out there on YouTube. You can find it. But the bottom line is this. I mean, although I call him a liberal running as an independent in that moderate lane, I think of it more as a populist. Most populists don't have a particular, let's say, stable of ideas that they are a support of. So, for example, a conservative is going to be that person who is less taxes, less government, those types of leanings. When you think about a populist, the populist really is the individual that is rage and despair. That person who seen, let's say, 4 years of the Democrats and they don't like it. And they've seen 4 years of the Republicans and they don't like it. So there's kind of a knee-jerk reaction with the populists to try to get someone in there who's actually going to spend time solving the problems. And that's the lane that RFK is trying to fill. He is trying to present to the American people that third option. The last time that we've had a true third option was probably Ross Perot when he was in the race with Bill Clinton and George Herbert Walker Bush. So the three of them, it turned out that Perot turned out to be a spoiler for George Bush. And that's how we ended up with Bill Clinton. So it generally is the case that the third party, whoever that option is, they generally play the role of spoiler to, in most cases, the incumbent. All right. So when you see this happening, you have to say that that kind of spells more trouble for Joe Biden than it does for Donald Trump. But the only issue here is that RFK probably has the propensity or the capacity to pull votes away from both Democrats and Republicans. There's a romance there with the Kennedy name and what it stands for and all the rest. And I think that if he's pulling from both Republicans and Democrats, and if it turns out to be a wash, the race is very close. So then the race really looks again like, staying up until the wee hours of the morning, watching the vote count come in from places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. Don't think that Florida's going to be much of a toss-up. Nevada coming in from Arizona. You're going to be looking at those 5 states because if RFK running in this independent lane ends up taking an equal share from both Democrats and Republicans. So, hey, that's the top. That's the number 5 story in our top 5 of the week. RFK running now as an independent, and good luck to him. That's all I can say. Good luck to him, because takes a lot of people, a lot of moxie to run for president, and he's out there on a limb. His family's not even with him with this independent run. They released a statement the other day that kind of they said their piece. they were not supporting him. They thought he had kind of strayed from the traditional Kennedy values and a few other things that they had to say. I think it was Caroline that was kind of like the spokesman for what was happening. So anyway, that's number 5. In the number 4 slot, well, let me ask you this question. Is Bidenomics working? The number 4 story comes to us from the economic indicators. And when you look at the economic indicators, let me backdrop this and say, remember when we were last had a conversation about Biden. We were talking about the jobs number, and last week's job numbers for the month of September came in at 336,000 jobs. And that was a good thing. People wanted to see that, or economists wanted to see that. The Fed looked at it with kind of like a slant eye, just to kind of, because they're trying to tamp down inflation. And the way they do it is to kind of tick up interest rates. So it's quite conceivable that they could be looking at a quarter point or a half point move when it comes to the November Fed meeting. But we also got a little bit of news this week when it comes to CPI, the Consumer Price Index, when we were looking at core inflation. When you look at core inflation, the number was just released on, I do believe it was on Thursday. So core inflation came in around 4.1%. So when you look at the 4.1%, I'm going to take this, let me take this here and just move this last year. When you look at the last year, let me grab my little pointer here so you can kind of get a feel for what it is that I'm saying. This trend is good. That's a good trend for the president and for Bidenomics. Hopefully it remains that way, right? But couple this number with the jobs number, right? Couple that later in the month, we're going to see the gross domestic product. How much has the economy grown in a month? When you look at that number, along with the consumer report that's released, I think it's on the last Friday of the month, take those four indicators. If they're doing well, I can say this. I can't tell you whether or not Bidenomics is actually working, right? But I can tell you it hasn't blown up anything yet. So when I say that, I mean, we have to stay tuned. And remember, we have a backdrop of 40 plus years of supply side economics where we were growing the economy from the top down, right? And then we had, before supply side economics, we basically had some Keynesian big government spending that took us really from the 1930s into like the late 1970s, early 80s. So there's a period there. So what Biden is doing isn't that per se, right? Because that was more bottom up. Biden's idea is to grow the economy from the middle out. He wants to put most of his concentration into sustaining the middle class in America. He believes that if you can sustain the middle class in America, you can grow the economy faster. Okay, so that's the genesis of what Bidenomics means. What we've seen with the recent indicators is that the economy is kind of chugging along, doing what it's supposed to do. Core inflation, when you look at the CPI number, this number here at 4.1, it's moving in the right direction. Remember, the target is still 2%. So we're 2 points off the target. And I'm going to tell you, that's going to be a hard number to get to, because out of everything you hear, right, whether it be the economic news or whether you're talking about Congress isn't legislating, right? And the economic news, there's a story not being told there, and that story is about the Trump tariffs. Remember all of the Trump tariffs on China? Those goods, and you have to remember, the U.S. is an economy. We import a lot of Chinese goods. So ultimately, those tariffs on those imports end up affecting the U.S. citizens. So when you look at the price increases, some of that is the money that the Congress approved and the president's, both Biden and Trump, signed off on. But there's another sticky wicket part, and that is the Trump tariffs. No one likes to talk about it, but I'm telling you, it's there. It's there. So that's the readouts right now. So look forward to the next couple weeks. We got GDP again. We're going to measure, okay, what type of growth are we doing? And we need that growth to be positive. It needs to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 2.5%, right? Because that's the way that this economy grows. And I got to tell you, I mean, we're a legacy economy, right? As a legacy economy, it doesn't grow too much more than 3%. All right, and it's within the range of still creating 2 million jobs per year. I think the 1.5, 2%, 2.5, 3% is somewhere between 670 billion to maybe like 740 billion additional dollars being created, right? So when you think about that, those are that's the reason why the economy still moves along, and the reason why we talk about how much GDP did the U.S. create. If it's at 3%, they're like a $20 trillion economy, moving from $20 trillion to 23 trillion. I think we're probably closer to like 26 trillion today. So that's the reason why it continues to grow, because we had that GDP growth per quarter that we're seeing, or per month that we're seeing. So okay, again, GDP at the end of the month. The consumer survey, also important at the end of the month. What does the consumer survey tell us? It tells us how consumers feel. So it gives us a readout as to what the consumer feels when it comes to spending. And that's going to be huge as we are now into the fourth quarter. This is where retail sales and retail spending jumps up dramatically because of all of the shopping that happens. So we got Halloween, we have Thanksgiving, we got Christmas, we got shopping New Year's. All those four patterns create a story for us in the fourth quarter. So we look for GDP to be high, especially during the last quarter of the year. All right, so that's story number 4. Story number 4, Bidenomics. Is it working? It's too early to tell. But again, it hasn't blown up anything yet. Okay, so that being said, on to the number 3 story. And when it comes to the number 3 story, folks, guess what? Guess what we're at? We got to talk about Donald Trump. We had to talk about Donald Trump. And why do we need to talk about Donald Trump? It's not because of his trials that are going to civil trial. He wasn't present this past week for the civil trial, but he will be back in the courtroom next week. And I think Michael Cohen is up to speak to the judge, and to be, or I should say, he's there to testify and to be cross-examined. So that being said, it's going to be entertaining to see Trump's reaction to Michael Cohen and everything else that happens next week. But why is he in the news this week? He's in the news this week. Oh, and I should say, there's some things going on down in Florida. But that's not why he's in the news. He's in the news this week because guess what? Trump just doesn't know what to say, right? He just doesn't know what to say. So he got into a little bit of a rift on Benjamin Netanyahu and what's going on in Israel. And let's listen to what he had to say, and then let's talk about it on the other side.
And they said, gee, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack from the north, because that's the most vulnerable spot. I said, wait a minute. You know, Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart. The press doesn't like when they say it. You know, I said that President Xi of China, 1.4 billion people, he controls it with an iron fist. I said, he's a very smart man. They killed me the next day. I said he was smart. What am I going to say? But Hezbollah, they're very smart. And they have a national defense minister or somebody saying, I hope Hezbollah doesn't attack us from the north. So the following morning they attacked. They might not have been doing it, but if you listen to this jerk, you would attack from the north, because he said that's our weak spot. Whoever heard of officials saying on television that they hope the enemy doesn't attack in a certain area? Now, unless it's a con job. But you know what a con job is? You're waiting there ready. You want them if you want them, but they weren't ready. They weren't ready. You know, say what you want. Israel was not ready. This was a big surprise. This was a terrible thing that happened. They weren't ready.
Anyway, so bottom line there, more he had to say. Actually, his comments lasted for like, I think in all, it was about maybe 30 minutes, 50 minutes. But bottom line is, he said some things about Netanyahu, eventually saying that he wasn't prepared, and he was upset that Netanyahu didn't fall when there was an attack. Can't remember who the Iranian leader is, but I think he was like Iranian defense minister or something like that. They had his flight traffic and some other things, and the U.S. lit him up. And before the U.S. lit him up, the Israelis were supposed to be with us, but the Israelis said that they weren't going to be participating in whatever took place. And uh, Trump took offense to it. And so, of course, think of that along the backdrop of him saying how Hezbollah, some very smart guys, along with the backdrop of saying Xi was a very smart guy and calling and congratulating the Communist Party on their anniversary. And also, talking about Putin being a smart guy. They did look, in my estimation, Trump just says things. I think what he's trying to say is that, these Hezbollah guys in particular have a good understanding of Israeli military movements, a good understanding of Israeli politics, and they use that to their advantage. But it's the language that he chooses that generally gets him in trouble. And that's I gotta tell you, that's always been the case with Donald Trump. It's what he is trying to say. I mean, like I told you last week or whatever it was that we spoke about Trump, where he lost me. He lost me when he was talking about we sitting there in Helsinki with Vladimir Putin, and the question is asked: does he believe Vladimir Putin when he tells him that he had nothing to do with XYZ ABC? And Trump says, well, he was very firm in what he said, and I kind of believe him more than I believe my own intelligence apparatus, to that effect, right? And that's the problem with Trump, and he has this. Whether it's it's kind of like crushing, like he's crushing on these dictators and these these people who aren't good people, but he tends to want to mimic them. He wants to be a strong man here in the country. He made a comment about Xi Jinping being the leader over a billion or so people, and he's a strong leader and all these things. He wants to be that type of person here in this country. Do I know that person? I don't know that person, but he gives the impression that that's what he wants. He wants to rule the United States as if he were a king. And quite frankly, it's kind of, you kind of ask yourself, I think 250 years, we went through the same thing. And that guy was over in England. But so people see that, and I see it. Trump just says some of the most idiotic things. I mean, sometimes they're just so stupid. You just look at him and you're like, man, why do you stop it? Just stop talking, because you're not helping yourself. You're only hurting yourself when you think about some of the things that you're saying. So again, that's Trump. That's the number 3 story. Trump and Hezbollah being smart guys, and Netanyahu. Those guys weren't prepared. Those guys not being prepared is a big issue. Again, we're not to the top story of the night, so I better not blow the whistle on that, right? So anyway, so that's number 3, Trump and his comments. His mouth generally gets him in trouble, and in this particular case, it's not an exception. Right. So that's the number 3 story. The number 2 story of the night. The number 2 story, folks, comes to us from the Great Hall of Congress, right? So back to looking at these 2 guys. And so at the beginning of the week, it was Monday when we had learned that both Steve Scalise and Jim Jordan were thinking, well, they had aspirations of becoming the next Speaker of the House. That was Monday. They had a meeting on Tuesday, right? Or it was kind of like get to know the member, whatever the heck it was, right? So they were getting to know the potential speaker. And of course, they had a vote on Wednesday. But by Wednesday night, after Steve Scalise is picked as the potential speaker, he resigns abruptly. So that was on Wednesday. By Thursday, it was, well, who else is going to run? Jim Jordan decides to throw his hat back into the ring. And of course, he ended up getting 124 votes, which was less than 153 votes, I think, that Steve Scalise was able to secure on his way to 217. They need 217 in order to get control of the House or to be crowned Speaker. And of course, those votes aren't coming from Democrats, right? So you have 124 votes. So he really needs about 90, what is that? Somewhere close in the 90s votes from his caucus, Republican caucus, in order to solidify his spot, Steve Scalise, or not Steve Scalise, but Jim Jordan's spot as Speaker. Now, I don't know how that's going to happen, but I have told you, and there have been some rumblings, right? That, well, my comment to you was that, and I was being facetious when I said it. Remember, I was being facetious when I said it. I said that it was quite possible that these guys are going to muck up this thing so much with Kevin McCarthy that they will end up electing Jeffers, the Democrat minority leader, Speaker of the House. And, and I told you how I was going to get there. I think that there will probably be some Republicans that will bolt and try to form some type of coalition government or bolt from the Republican Party altogether. The likely group of people to do this would be moderate Republicans. Remember, those moderate Republicans are generally referred to as, well, liberal. They're generally referred to as liberal Republicans, right? So they're in that camp where they live in these purple districts. Remember, purple districts are areas where you have a good mix of Republicans and Democrats, so red and blue. Right. So when you look at the red and blue, you see these purple districts appear, and those individuals end up being a bellwether, right, for the conference. So if the conference here can't get their act together, the people who generally make things happen, the bipartisan commissions and the rest of it, this group of people, I got to tell you, it's probably going to be, we're probably a week away, if I had to guess, about a week away before there start to become some overtures toward Democrats about some coalition government. Democrats are going to want something, and more than likely it's going to have to be committee seats that they're interested in. And at this point, this is where I did want to play a couple sound bites from Jeffers. He was on NPR, and he had a few things that, well, was kind of interesting what he said. So let me tell you what he said. Let's talk about it on the other side.
Democrats could work with, and is there any scenario under which Democrats would supply him the votes that he needs to be elected?
I've had a positive working relationship with Steve Scalise throughout the years. He obviously is very conservative, and we have different values in terms of what we believe is right for the health, the safety, the economic well-being of the American people. But this is an issue right now for the Republicans to work out. It is the responsibility of the Republican majority to identify a speaker who can both achieve 217 under the current number of people who are in the House, or hold and maintain 217. And over the last week or so, the Republican majority has been unable to do either. And that's why we continue to offer a bipartisan path forward so we can restructure the rules of the House to enable common sense bipartisan legislation that has strong support from Democrats and Republicans to receive up or down votes without being blocked by the extreme MAGA Republican wing of the House Republican Conference. There is a real path and a real opportunity to be serious, to be substantive, to be sober in meeting the needs of the American people and our allies like Israel and Ukraine across the world. But we just need traditional Republicans to break from their extremist wing and join us in a bipartisan coalition.
Okay, but listen to what he says next. The question is the setup.
When you talk about this bipartisan path, are you talking about the fact that you would only need 5 House Republicans to join with the 212 Democrats and elect you House Speaker. And we should say there are 18 Republican members who have been elected from districts that Joe Biden won. Is that what you're speaking of?
No, because from the very beginning we have said this should not be about any one particular individual and any one particular individual's aspirations to lead either House Democrats or House Republicans. This is about what is good for the American people, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans. That's why at this moment, we've got to find a way to come together, restructure the House in a bipartisan way, designed to allow for common sense things to come to the floor, receive an up or down vote, for us to be able to actually move legislation that emerges from the Senate that is bipartisan in nature, and Leader Schumer has done a tremendous job in working with Leader McConnell in that regard, and we want to get the House back on track.
Okay, so let me interpret all of that gobbledygook speak, right? Let me interpret that for you. Here's what he was actually saying. He said, look, you know, if Republicans can't get their act together, I'm pretty sure we could meet with those moderate Republicans in order to form a coalition type government or coalition type House, minority led House. Okay. And even if it's not a minority led House, they want to pick a Republican and they want Democrats to help them. Here's some things that they're going to be looking for. One, all of the investigation stuff that the House wants to embark on when it comes to the Bidens stops. I can guarantee you that's on the table if they're trying to build a coalition type government. The other thing that will stop is that the committee assignments and all these blackball deals of keeping people off of committees and the rest of it, that too would stop. They would probably want some committee chair spots if they're going to build this type of government. So you see that too. So there are a number of things that Democrats would be looking for if Republicans want their help. And guess what? That's politics. You're not, I mean, if you're going to enlist the help of your rival, you can only anticipate that your rival is going to be looking for something in return. And that's what he's ultimately saying. We're going to need some assurances along the way. So that's what Jeffries is going to look. Again, I think it probably the whispers, this is where we're at right now. We're in the whisper part of this conversation, but the whispers get louder, I think, by the end of next week. And the reason why it gets louder is because, remember, we have a continued resolution that we're operating under right now for a period of, they said, a total of 45 days. So by November 17th, we got to have a budget in place for 2024. If we don't, there's a problem. If we can't get another continued resolution because we can't get a budget, that too is a problem. It's a problem. So when you start looking at this, it starts looking more dire for Republicans. And again, I'll tell you, Republicans have had a hard time governing ever since Newton Gingrich left that speakership. It's just been hard for people to do. You saw, what was my guy from Ohio? I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. John Boehner. John Boehner said he didn't want the job anymore because it was hard to govern. And why was it hard to govern Republicans in the House? It's because of those factions. These guys, if they can't get it all their way, they are willing to shut down the entire process. And that's a problem. So when you get people like that, that are willing to shut down the process, it's impossible to work with them. So you saw Paul Ryan, you saw John Boehner, and now you see Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy, you know, for the most part, drank his own hemlock, tied his own face covering or eye covering and smoked his own cigarette and shot himself. I mean, this whole thing is a mess. It's a big, just chaotic mess, but it's chaotic because Republicans just have a hard time governing because they have factions that have too much power. It's okay for them to have the opinions that they have, but they just realistically just have too much power. And because of that, just shuts down. It's just gumming up the entire works. So guess what, folks? That's the number 2 story. That's the number 2 story. Now on our way to the number 1 story. Okay, everybody, we've arrived at the number 1 story of the week. And of course, we all know it's got to be Israel. It's got to be Israel and what's going on in Hamas, right? So everyone is aware that as of last Saturday, the Israelis were attacked by Hamas. Of course, Hamas is located in the Gaza Strip area. The current death toll, I think, is like 1,900 Palestinians and 13 or 1,400 Israelis. There are some Americans who have been killed as well. And also there are hostages, which are probably Americans and Israelis. And it's not a good thing. This is not good for a number of reasons. One, just remember, we don't have a functioning House of Representatives. So, theoretically, only Congress has the ability to declare war. So if the United States needed to go to war, Congress isn't there to declare it. So you might say, well, if you know anything about the U.S. and Congress's relinquishment of certain controls, and I'm speaking specifically about the War Powers Act of 1972 or 73, I can't remember. It does give the president the latitude to send troops and send equipment, everything. Of course, he does have to notify the House and the Senate after they are deployed. So anyway, so the situation is Israel is on a war footing. They have declared war on Hamas. The latest is that they have asked that people from Gaza leave the northern part of Gaza and make their way south. And of course, that's a huge task because you got 1 million or so people who will have to make this trek. They are dropping leaflets. They are dropping all kind of information telling the people that they need to leave because Israel is amassing their war machine right on the border of Gaza, and it looks like they are going to start, some urban warfare. They are going to be looking for Hamas, the perpetrators of this heinous crime. They're going to be looking for Hamas, but I can guarantee you along the way, they are probably going to kill a number of Palestinians. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that we're dealing with casualties of war in this case because Hamas is going to hide amongst the people. Hamas isn't necessarily an army. Hamas is basically a group of well, they have power now, right? They do have power. However, the problem is that they don't have an army, so it's just a group of militias and the rest. And Israelis are going to come in and they're going to Bigfoot that entire place. And what I mean by Bigfoot, they are going to just smash and grab everything that they can in their attempt to find and root out Hamas. So, and again, we could argue whether it's right or wrong. I could tell you this: I have feelings on both sides, right? I mean, I don't like to see the innocent people get caught up in this, but Hamas is using them as human shields, and I just know on the other side of this, Israel is going to just start running through there in order to find Hamas. And in the process of doing that, they're probably going to kill a large number of innocent civilians. Now, also, I want you to keep this in mind. You have U.S. citizens over there in Israel. The U.S. has a standing policy that any American in a foreign country that is under siege or in a foreign country that is at war, the U.S. will come get you. All right. And they're generally going to send the Marines in order to do that. So I would not be surprised. I mean, they're already sending the USS Gerald Ford and that strike group over to the region. So got a lot of U.S. hardware and aircraft carriers, frigates, you name it. There's a lot of equipment moving over there, and trust me, the Marines are with them. So it's only a matter of time before they get settled in that region and they start sharing intelligence with the Israelis. I mean, the intelligence. I mean, a lot of people will look. The intelligence part is interesting, but you know, when the U.S. starts sharing intel with the Israelis, it's going to be, you know, they're going to be listening for chatter and for a few other things, and they're gonna help the Israelis, you know, find Hamas, no doubt in my mind. Now, what does this do? Remember, this attack came on the backdrop of Israel and Saudi Arabia getting close to some normalized relationships. So, and remember, it also comes against the backdrop of the Iranians giving us 5 or 6 hostages for $6 billion. And we can argue the merits of $6 billion being released. And even if it was for humanitarian purposes, we can argue that point, right? So when you see it, I mean, that's the things that are happening in the background. And this isn't the first time that they've done this. I think it was the Oslo Accords during the Clinton administration that they ended up doing something similar. I mean, Hamas, they just torpedoed negotiations in the region. I think that was Israel and Egypt, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, so during that period, I mean, the intelligence, I guess that's what I'm trying to, the intelligence that they will share will lead to the capture of Hamas, but it's going to lead to the entire, I don't know what Gaza is going to look like after all this is said and done. I really don't. But I do know this, that Israel is going to, they're not going to let it go. Right. So remember that Hamas was voted in after the Israelis left Gaza in like 2004, 2005. Right. They voted in Hamas, and I think they had one election after that in 2007, and they haven't had any elections since. So Hamas has been de facto leadership in the Gaza Strip or the Palestinians in Gaza. So when you see that, I mean, it doesn't bode well for the Hamas, North's leadership. It doesn't bode well for the Palestinian people. It probably bodes well for the PLO, and I can't remember his name right now, but they may be, because I think they actually lost power. Mahmoud Abbas, I think it is. He lost control and lost that election in 2004 to Hamas. That's how they got into power. And of course, through that power play, you've seen the stance that the Palestinian people or the Palestinian government, Hamas, has taken with Israel. Now, on the humanitarian side, look, there's so much. I'm telling you, man, there is so much. I mean, look, I'm taking my hat off, so this is serious. There are so many different things that you could point at with regard to this and say, man, this is not cool. As far as the government, the governing body of Hamas, they have no industry over in Gaza. They're totally dependent on energy, food, you name it, everything. They're not getting education. I mean, the unemployment rate over there is like 99%. Okay, I mean, it's something crazy. 99% is probably being a little bit facetious about it, but it's extremely high. Okay, with the extremely high unemployment, there's a lot of, you know, we talk about it here in our politics, a lot of the rage and despair. There's a ton of rage and despair happening in Gaza and has been happening in Gaza for quite some time. And, you know, I mean, I got to say something about U.S. intelligence, too, because everybody's asking the question, why didn't the Israelis see this happening? Right. But Israel is really dependent on the United States in a lot of different ways. So when you see the Israelis miss this, I mean, just huge miss, right? I also asked the question, why or how did the U.S. miss this? Now, this says something about U.S. intelligence. I'm not quite certain what it says, but I have a sneaky suspicion that we have a large amount of our intel resources pointed in one direction, and that direction is in the Ukrainian direction. So that has captivated the intelligence community's attention. Now they have to pivot, right? And they have to start looking in two different areas in order to gather intel because of conflicts that have broken out in the regional, in their selected regional spheres, right? So, you know, how did the U.S. miss it? Like I said, I can't say they're not listening to everything, but I can say that as far as a lot of the metadata, the rest of it, I mean, they're probably got their attention pointed at Ukraine. So I'm issuing that excuse, not really knowing, because I'm not part of the intelligence apparatus. I'm just a guy that follows politics, and I follow the CIA fact. You know, look, I do a lot of geeky things. All right. So what I'm telling you is that when I look at it, it just kind of says that this is one we shouldn't have missed, especially the details that are coming out as to the planning and the preparation that Hamas did in order to pull off this attack they did last Saturday. It is very clear that it was very detailed, very specific. They had little training camps within Gaza, right? That no one, for whatever reason, weren't paying any attention to. So that's very suspect. There's a political cost that will be paid. Everyone knows that Netanyahu was already in trouble to begin with. There will be some political retribution for this. And I got to tell you, I mean, at the end of the day, once Israel rose through there, once all of this stuff happens, right? I have no idea what's on the other side of this. I really don't. I don't know if this widens the conflict, right? If the regional players get involved, right? So what if Iran does get involved? Or what do we do if and when we learn that Iran wasn't involved? Because Israel's going to want some retribution there, right? And then you got Jordan, you got Lebanon, Hezbollah, you got all of these regional players that are, there's no doubt in my mind, they're going to look at this. And based on how Israel reacts and based on what happens, we could be looking at a much wider conflict over there. So we really don't know. Everyone will need to kind of stay tuned. You know, for those people who are religiously inclined, I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking that this is the prophecy and the rest. I mean, could be. I don't know. But one thing I do know the actions on the ground will precipitate some wider conflict, or could be the catalyst for some wider conflict. We just need to kind of stay tuned and kind of see what happens. So, folks, that's the top 5 news stories of the week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you got any questions, or if you want to offer your opinion, put it in the comments, like it, and share it. We want to grow this channel, man. And what to do, man? I really want to get a production team together, because you know, some of this stuff I do myself, and man, I gotta tell you, one-man band is kind of hard to do this, but I think we have a lot of good information. the we is myself and the mouse in my pocket. We have a lot of good information that we could impart into the American people as to how they see politics in the U.S., how they see themselves in the political process within the U.S. I mean, there's a lot of things happening in the U.S. There is, but everyone, you know, we have our silos where we grab a lot of our information. A lot of people will try to call it mainstream media versus whatever, you know, people who are interested in doing something different. I don't know what you really want to call it, but what I can say is that you know, the U.S. is a tinderbox itself. So, and I want to follow this. I think the 2024 election, actually, I think the 2024 election, if we could get these individuals, these people who are running, to look more to the future, that bodes well for the American people. The more we get entrenched in dealing with stuff that happened in the past and trying to get retribution for stuff like that, doesn't help us all. It only spins out everybody. And like I said before, I mean, hey, there are triggers within the Constitution that are there in situations just like this. There's no need for the American people to be fighting anyone amongst ourselves in particular. Shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves. There are mechanisms within the Constitution, that being a constitutional convention, in order to get to the bottom of all this. And a constitutional convention takes in everybody. I mean, there is representation from all facets, whether it be the political parties, whether it be the lobby interests. All of these factors are on the table. And that means, too, the American people. The American people have to be there, too. And, man, I mean, when you see this, when you see this happening, the way that we see it in the U.S., I mean, it's crystal clear. We need to do something because right now, what we're constantly rehashing over and over again is not good for any of us. So all that being said, folks, again, I was finished, but now I'm really finished. Like this show, subscribe. We got more content. I got to tell you, there's so many different shows I want to do, especially on the economics. People, economics, here I go again, right? Economics is important that you understand, but for the longest, we treat economics like we treat talking about religion and politics, where people tell you not to talk about it. Well, you get told not to talk about economics too, and people look at it and act like they don't. It's really clear. There's certain things you need to be looking and pay close attention to. Economics in the United States is one of them. So there's many great stories I want to go through and talk to the American people about. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take other videos that we're going to post. And I got to tell you what, we're at the genesis of this, right? We're at the genesis of it. So you're going to see this get better, right? You're going to see this get better. So right now it's just me and my time that I'm putting in this. But eventually, I look forward to a production team and being able to give you great content with hopefully some rapid responses to the questions that you may have when we do lives, right? Because a lot of these things are important. Everybody has an opinion, like I've said before. It's up to us to be reasonable. You're not going to get it all your way, right? So what can we get, right? That's the most important piece. And we're always looking at what can we get with the eye toward the future. All right, so that's all I have to say tonight, folks. Hope you enjoyed this presentation. Folks, enjoy the weekend. Hey, it's getting cold outside. I'm in Indiana. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you next week.